At 06:47 a.m., near a hedgerow line west of Saint-Fromond, Normandy, morning mist clung low, muffling the world into a grey bruise of silence and breath. Then the German 88 cracked. The Sherman Lucky Lady 2 lurched, turret ringing as a near miss showered steel splinters across the crew. Inside that cramped steel coffin, sweat stung eyes and cordite burned throats. The coaxial Browning chattered, belt ripping through the feed chute, then snagged. Not now, not here. In the turret's belly, bow gunner and radio man Private First Class Eli Mercer yanked the feed, jammed. Again, 4 days of hedgerow fighting, and the coax kept choking. Belts twisted, links scattered, fire died when they needed it most. Up on the ridge, a Par 43 barked again, hunting them by sound. The tank shuddered. Eli clenched his teeth, and somewhere behind the lines, a grease-smeared mechanic was already tearing apart ration tins and busted fender braces, about to make the thing they'd mocked him for. A makeshift ammo belt guide, one that wouldn't stop. The air smelled of damp canvas, stale coffee, and diesel ghosts drifting through morning haze at 04:30 hours on June 30th, 1944. Rainwater beaded on hooded engine decks in the forward maintenance area of 3rd Armoured Division, 7 Corps, Normandy. A row of Shermans squatted like tired bulls, scarred from last night's march through the bocage country that was devouring American armour at Rates headquarters hadn't anticipated. Corporal Tom Harlan, 24, tank mechanic, wiped oil from his fingers onto already ruined fatigues. He lived in Greece, breathed in metal filings and carbon like other men breathed hope. Today began like every other day in Normandy, tired, soaked, and too quiet before the world detonated. He rolled a Browning M19 coaxial feed tray between his palms, listening more than seeing, feeling burrs and friction points with fingertips that had learned to read metal like Braille. Those belts twisted too easily inside the cramped turret spaces. Turret motion jerked them during traverse. Loader knees bumped them when men shifted positions under fire. Brass piled up wrong in the collection bag, creating back pressure that stalled the feed mechanism. He'd seen coax guns stop when they should have been singing, leaving crews vulnerable in the seconds that mattered most. "Just feed the damn thing right," someone muttered near the tool bench. Sergeant Boyle, crew chief of Lucky Lady 2, still smelling of last night's tobacco and nerves that never quite settled in the bocage fighting. Tom didn't look up from his examination of the feed tray. "Belts don't behave in a turret like they do on a tripod mount," Boyle snorted, pouring lukewarm coffee from a dented canteen cup. "Neither do tankers." Laughter rippled through the pre-dawn maintenance area, light and brittle like ice on puddles. Someone slapped Tom's shoulder as they passed, heading toward the mess tent. "Still chasing your magic shoot, Harlan?" Not magic. Math, steel, and stubbornness distilled into a problem he couldn't stop thinking about. The M19 had been designed for infantry use on tripods and vehicular mounts with open feed paths. Inside a Sherman's turret, the geometry changed. The coaxial mount placed the gun in a confined space where belts had to feed through multiple angles during turret rotation. Ordnance Department technical manuals mentioned potential feed complications under dynamic operational conditions, but offered no field solutions. But they didn't need theory right now. They needed fire that didn't quit when German machine gun nests opened up from hedgerow embankments. A distant rumble rolled from the front lines 2 miles north, German artillery waking up to greet the morning. Tom lifted his head, oil-stained hands going still. The day was about to start bleeding, the way every day bled in Normandy's green maze of ancient earthworks and concealed positions, and that coax still wasn't right. Records from the previous week showed Lucky Lady 2 had experienced 4 ammunition feed stoppages in 3 days of contact, 4 times when suppressive fire died and infantry paid the price. Rain gave way to sunlight sharp as broken glass by 0800 hours at the forward assembly point near Le Désert. Mud steamed in the sudden heat. Tank tracks clattered like steel teeth, grinding earth as the battalion pushed up hedgerow to hedgerow, infantry riding fenders with rifles bouncing against painted metal and hands gripping whatever purchase they could find. Inside Lucky Lady II, Eli Mercer checked the M1919 belts for the 3rd time that morning. Standard 250-round disintegrating link belts coiled beside him in the assistant driver's position like dull brass snakes that promised violence and sometimes delivered jamming instead. He hated them and loved them and needed them in equal measure. Bows clear. Coke staged and ready. Lieutenant Jack Rourke nodded without looking, eyes locked through the turret periscope, scanning hedgerow shadows for the telltale shapes of German anti-tank guns. Positions like rabbits out here, dug in every 100 yards. Driver Hank Madsen muttered from his seat, voice tight. Rabbits don't kill Shermans by the dozen. Truth, spoken plain. Severcorps' operational log from 2 days earlier had recorded 28 tanks disabled in 12 hours of bocage fighting. Mines, 88mm guns, Panzerfausts fired from hedgerow corners at ranges too close for evasion. Normandy swallowed armor like a steel-chewing god that never grew satisfied. A snap of branches to the right, rifle cracks echoing. The tank jolted forward, Madsen gunning the Ford GAA engine. Eli's heart punched his ribs hard enough to hurt. Routine patrol evaporated like breath. In cold air, radio crackled with urgent voices. Contact front, machine gun nest, right hedge, engage, engage. The cokes barked alive under Rourke's thumb trigger. Belts rattled through the feed mechanism. Disintegrating links clinked into the collection bag. And for 3 blessed seconds, Eli felt the beat of mechanical confidence that meant the weapon system was functioning as designed. Then he felt the jam. Every gun crew in Normandy knew the sensation. Weapon hiccuping, that mechanical heartbeat stalling mid-rhythm. Eli cursed, hands already moving to clear the belt feed as German rifle rounds slapped hull armor like angry hail seeking entry. The belt had kinked where it entered the feed tray, twisted by turret motion into a configuration that prevented smooth link separation. He straightened it with practiced urgency, his fingers knowing the motions from repetition born of necessity. The gun resumed firing, but precious seconds had bled away. Seconds when German gunners could adjust positions, when infantry couldn't advance, when the mathematics of suppressive fire failed. He wanted to believe in that mechanic's crazy belt guide idea, the contraption Tom Harlan kept sketching on scraps of paper and building from salvaged tin, wanted to believe that someone understood the problem and possessed a solution that didn't require requisitions through channels that moved slower than German counterattacks. But belief didn't clear jams. Hands did. Training did. Muscle memory and the particular violence of yanking twisted metal into compliance while bullets searched for weak points in armor plate. He wrestled the metal serpent again, heart hammering louder than gunfire outside, wondering if today would be the day a jam lasted too long and infantry voices on the radio went silent. Smoke drifted across the casualty clearing point near the Carentan Road by 1200 hours. Engines idled with the distinctive rumble of Shermans, waiting for orders or repairs. A medic knelt beside a tank loader with shrapnel in his thigh, whispering steady calm into chaos with the practiced voice of someone who'd stopped counting wounds. Tom Harlan crouched beside Lucky Lady 2, eyeing the coax mount with the focused attention of a man reading failure in metal. Eli waved a twisted ammunition belt at him, frustration etched deep in a face too young for such weariness. It kinked again right here, pulled sideways during turret traverse, lost maybe 10 seconds of fire. Tom grunted acknowledgement. He'd seen it too often in the past 3 weeks of Normandy operations. Belt feed systems had been designed and tested for open mounts on jeeps and half-tracks. Inside a Sherman's confined turret space, constant turret traverse, twisted belts like wet rope. The Ordnance Department's Armor Board had issued memos warning of feed complications under confined turret operations, but warnings didn't solve engineering problems in forward areas. Good men died when guns fell silent. The mathematics were brutal and simple. "Let me try something," Tom murmured, pulling out his kit of scavenged materials. Boyle rolled his eyes, lighting a cigarette with hands that showed slight tremor. "Here we go," the grease wizard and his fairy belt contraption. Eli didn't laugh. His expression held the seriousness of someone who'd felt bullets hit armor while his gun choked. "If he's got an answer, I want it. I don't care if it's made from mess kits and baling wire." Tom pulled out scavenged sheet metal, panels cut from damaged ration tins, torn fender braces salvaged from knocked-out tanks, a section of aluminum from a crashed liaison aircraft's cowling. He measured turret arc with a length of communications wire, mimicking the belt's motion through space as the turret rotated through its 360-degree traverse. Boyle shook his head, exhaling smoke. "Scrap metal is not Army doctrine, Harlan. Ordnance Board hasn't approved whatever that is," Tom answered without looking up, voice low and steady. "Dead tankers aren't doctrine either, Sergeant." Silence fell heavy and real across the small group. Someone coughed. Metal clanked as a wrench dropped nearby. Tom hammered a curve into the sheet metal, creating a cradle that would guide the belt through the critical angle where turret motion caused the most twisting. He measured twice, bent once, working with the efficiency of someone who had already built this device 3 times in his head during sleepless nights. It wasn't pretty. Rivets showed. Edges were rough finished. It didn't have to be pretty. It had to feed ammunition without interruption when German machine guns opened up at 75 yards. Radio call from the battalion net, crackled urgent. "Enemy armor movement near Hill 192. All crews mount up immediately." Time was over. The morning's brief respite had ended. Lucky Lady the Cou's engine coughed to life, belching blue smoke. The tank clanked forward toward the assembly point, tracks chewing mud. Eli glanced back at Tom through the open turret hatch. Half thanks, half doubt, all desperate hope. Tom lifted his broken knuckled hand in a promise, his wedding ring catching sunlight. He'd finished the shoot before nightfall, before the war finished them, before another 10-second jam cost lives that couldn't be requisitioned back through any supply channel. Hedgerows closed like green trap walls by 14:35 hours on the approaches to Saint-Fromond. The ancient earthwork embankments rose 10 to 15 feet high, thick with centuries of root growth and topsoil that stopped tank rounds and concealed entire platoons. US tactical doctrine was still catching up to the reality of bocage warfare. Bulldozers and Kulin hedgerow-cutting devices hadn't yet reached this far south in the sector. Tanks crawled, every hedge a possible ambush site. Lucky Lady 2 advanced with infantry flanking close on both sides, rifles at ready, eyes scanning shadows. Eli watched those shadows slip past his vision slits, finger resting near the coax trigger, breathing shallow in the turret's chemical-tinged air. A mortar thumped somewhere east. Dirt geysered 40 yards left. The tank lurched, engine roaring protest as Madsen accelerated through the killing zone. Loader Jimmy O'Rourke shouted target, Coordinates! Lieutenant Rourke relayed information to platoon net. Eli breathed in cordite memory and fear. The last jam still haunted his fingers, muscle memory of twisted metal and lost time. A German MG-42 barked across the hedge, its distinctive sound like ripping canvas. Rate of fire reached 1-200 rounds per minute when properly served. The Coax answered with its own voice, spitting 30 caliber fury at the muzzle flash location. 30 seconds of sustained fire. A minute, belt fed smooth through the mechanism, then the familiar snag, that mechanical hiccup that meant death was negotiating with luck. Clear it, Rourke snapped, not looking back, trusting Eli's hands. Eli's hands blurred through the clearance drill. Sweat stung eyes. The belt had twisted again, refusing mechanical discipline, fighting against the geometry of confined space and violent motion. He slammed the feed straight with practiced brutality, firing resuming after 5 seconds of silence, but time lost mattered in combat mathematics. 5 seconds was 5 seconds of German gunners adjusting, infantry unable to advance, tactical initiative bleeding away. Infantry sergeant's voice burst through the radio, urgent and afraid. "We're pinned down. Is that gun down?" "No!" Eli barked into his throat mic. "Just..." Belt slipped again, the metal snake refusing its cage. Machine guns ruled seconds in combat. Seconds ruled lives. The equation was simple and merciless. He heard something crack in his resolve, some faith in mechanical systems that had sustained him through training and combat until now. These belts were killing him, killing the infantry who depended on suppressive fire, killing tactical momentum when it mattered most. Somewhere behind the lines, Tom Harlan hammered tin and willpower into shape, racing against evening and next morning's violence. Time clawed forward like a wounded animal, and the hedgerows waited with ancient patience for men and metal to break. Tom's workspace at 1600 hours consisted of mud, an ammunition crate for a workbench, and desperation refined into focused action. Tools clanged against metal with rhythmic purpose. He heated scrap steel on a portable burner improvised from a damaged Coleman stove, bending the metal around a scavenged .30 caliber feed tray rail. He measured belt drag by feel rather than calipers, eyes half closed, mind-mapping turret arcs he'd crawled through 100 times during maintenance operations. A company clerk paused while passing, scoffing at the scattered materials. "Making jewelry, Corporal?" Tom didn't look up from his work, hands steady. "Making sure your tankers see breakfast tomorrow?" He layered ration tin sheeting inside bracing steel to reduce friction coefficient, understanding that smoothness mattered more than strength in this application. Added a spring guide cannibalized from a broken M1 Garand clip pouch, tension calibrated to maintain belt alignment without binding. Improvised engineering wasn't the Army way, wasn't in any technical manual or Ordnance Department specification, but neither was dying with ammunition still loaded and a silent gun. A field order lay pinned under his elbow, 3rd Armoured Division Directive, emphasizing the requirement to maintain continuous machine gun fire support during bocage advances. They needed sustained fire capability, not spurts interrupted by mechanical failure, not guns that choked when German counterattacks came screaming out of hedgerow corners. He heard incoming wounded somewhere behind the medical tent, stretcher bearers moving with urgent purpose. He worked faster, hands guided by muscle memory and the particular urgency of knowing his work would be tested under fire within hours. By dusk his hands shook from caffeine, accumulated fear, and something resembling hope. The chute gleamed in fading light, reflecting orange sunset through its crude curves. Ugly as sin, practical as breath, true to purpose. He wiped sweat with a sleeve, streaked with oil and Normandy dust that got into everything and never quite washed out. If Battalion dismissed it tomorrow morning, he'd weld the device onto Lucky Lady 2 himself, under fire if necessary, regulations be damned. But something told him he wouldn't need to resort to insubordination. Something in Boyle's eyes during that afternoon conversation, in Eli's desperate hope, in the accumulating casualties from jammed weapons. Necessity was making believers by the hour. Combat was the testing ground that didn't care about procurement procedures or proper channels. Combat cared about what worked. He set the completed belt guide on his makeshift workbench, checking alignments one final time before full dark made precision impossible. Tomorrow he'd fit it to the lady before dawn. Tomorrow the bocage would render its judgment. In the distance artillery rumbled like approaching thunder. The war never slept in Normandy. It just paused long enough for exhausted men to prepare for the next round. Dawn broke cold on July 1st, 1944, near Saint-Fromond. Lucky Lady 2 rolled into the assembly area, with crews yawning into helmets, boots sinking in mud that never fully dried, faces hollow from days of continuous contact operations. Eli pulled the turret floor plate up, exposing the coax feed path and the cramped mechanical space where ammunition had to flow without interruption. Tom approached carrying his creation like a relic from some garage god's altar, wrapped in canvas to protect the finish. "Let's see if ugly wins the war," Eli muttered, exhaustion making his voice flat. Tom fitted the chute to the coax feed mechanism with careful precision. The device hugged the belt arc perfectly, angled to reduce twist during turret traverse, spring-tensioned to guide disintegrating links without binding. A simple retention clip, fabricated from baling wire, ensured the belt stayed aligned, even during violent turret motion under fire. Boyle leaned in skeptically, cigarette dangling. "Looks like a tin privy pipe, Harlan." Tom tightened the mounting screws with his well-worn wrench. "Yeah, but this one feeds justice at 450 rounds per minute." Groans echoed from nearby crew members, eye rolls, but nervous half-smiles too, the kind that meant humour had given fear some company and made waiting bearable. Rourke checked his watch, then scanned the tree line with binoculars. "Mount up. We move in 10. Infantrymen climbed aboard fenders, rifles slung, grenades hanging from web gear like steel fruit. One tapped Eli's hatch before it closed. "Better work, Mercer. Kraut's been nesting like hornets in these hedges since yesterday." Eli checked belt feed one final time with hands that knew every contour. Smooth, guided, rigid where the design needed rigidity, forgiving where flexibility mattered. The contraption looked wrong, too improvised, too rough-finished for military precision. But his fingers told a different story as he traced the feed path. He strapped into his position. Turret hydraulics hummed to life, that familiar whine of pressurized systems preparing for violence. Outside, engines rumbled across the assembly area. Tracks churned mud into chocolate-colored soup. The day tightened around them like a fist closing, morning light revealing hedgerow shadows and the particular green that meant Normandy and death. Time to trust metal, mind, and a mechanic's obsession with solving problems that killed people. Time to discover whether improvised engineering could match German machine guns and anti-tank weapons that had been perfected through years of industrial warfare. Rourke's voice crackled through the intercom. "All stations, radio check." Responses came back. Madsen, O'Rourke, Eli, 4 men in a steel box, rolling toward hedgerows that had already swallowed too many tanks. The lady moved forward, tracks bit earth, and in the turret's mechanical heart, a tin contraption waited for its test by fire. Explosive charges cracked earth at 0930 hours as engineers attempted cutting lanes through hedgerow embankments, Infantry rushed forward through the gaps, rifles chattering. Lucky Lady A2 surged through the breach, treads clinking, hull vibrating like caged thunder seeking release. German voices, close, too close, somewhere in the smoke and shattered vegetation. Rourke's command cut through the chaos. Fire the hedge. Eli squeezed trigger. The Coax roared, spitting lead teeth into brush and earthwork. The belt slid clean through the new guide. 1 foot, 2, 5, 10 feet of ammunition, feeding without interruption. No skip, no choke. German rifle fire answered immediately, rounds pinging off armor like nails hammered against a coffin lid. Traverse right, turret whined through hydraulic rotation. Eli watched the belt flex through the guide. Smooth, controlled, exactly as Tom had designed. The ammunition followed the curve without binding, spring tension maintaining alignment through the full 90-degree traverse. He didn't breathe, just felt rhythm replacing fear. Fire, feed, fire, feed. The chute held under operational stress. Infantry surged past the tank. Grenades arced toward German positions. Smoke rolled thick, obscuring everything beyond 20 yards. A German MG-42 opened up from a concealed position, that distinctive buzzsaw sound cutting through the morning. Eli stitched the hedge line with sustained fire, hot brass water falling to the turret floor in golden cascades. Muzzle smoke filled the confined space, fumes clawing at nostrils and throats. Still no jam. 50 rounds, 100, continuous fire. Boyle blinked hard, hands steady on his equipment, despite the realization dawning. Hell, it actually works. Rourke didn't look back, scanning for threats through his periscope. Good, we'll need it today. Ahead, deeper engine noise rumbled. Panzer IV or Stuggy III, the sound signature distinct from American armor. Eli's pulse spiked, adrenaline sharpening perception. The Coax wouldn't penetrate German armor, but it held infantry down, bought precious seconds for the 75 mm main gun to acquire and engage the real threat. Sometimes seconds were everything between living and being chalk marks on a casualty report. Lucky Lady II pushed forward through smoke and chaos. Battle pulled back with equal force, German resistance stiffening as the advance penetrated deeper into prepared defenses. But in the turret, a scrap metal belt guide kept feeding ammunition without complaint, and for the first time in 4 days, Eli felt something resembling confidence return to his hands. Combat blurred into sweat, grit, and ceaseless noise between 1100 and 1500 hours. Lucky Lady II anchored a crossroads assault, pivoting to support infantry pinned across 2 hedgerow complexes. German machine guns and panzer grenadiers counterattacked with the desperation of men defending prepared positions. Rourke fired high-explosive shells into bocage corners where enemy positions clustered. Loader O'Rourke swore continuously through burned fingers, handling hot brass casings. Madsen kept the hull angled toward threats like instinct, maximizing frontal armor protection. Eli fed belt after belt into the Coax. The improvised chute didn't care about heat or vibration or continuous operation, kept swallowing brass, spitting hate at enemy positions. 4 straight hours of sustained bursts, ammunition reloads, barrel changes when heat made the weapon glow, link clatter that became the soundtrack of survival. No jam, not once during the entire engagement. Radio logs compiled later that evening would record continuous machine gun fire from Lucky Lady II's call sign throughout the afternoon action. Infantry after-action reports specifically praised uninterrupted suppressive fire enabling advance across exposed terrain. Battalion S3 operational summary noted exceptional weapons discipline and sustained fire support from armor elements. But in the moment, statistics didn't exist, only heat and heartbeat, smoke so thick they tasted metal on their tongues, turret ventilation fan whining against exhaustion, barely moving the toxic air, knuckles bleeding from link drag and hot brass, Madsen whispering prayers into the engine hum, words lost in mechanical thunder. Eli fired until the trigger felt fused to bone, until his shoulder ached from bracing against recoil, until time stopped meaning anything except the rhythm of sustained fire. German resistance slackened gradually as afternoon wore on. Machine gun positions fell silent, some from ammunition exhaustion, some from casualties, some from tactical withdrawal. Infantry advanced in rushes, securing hedgerows yard by yard. When the world finally slowed to something resembling quiet, Eli slumped against his position, chest heaving like a distance runner. The belt guide glowed faintly from friction heat, its improvised paint scorched away to reveal raw metal beneath. Boyle tapped the device with something approaching reverence. Well, I'll be damned. 4 hours straight. Outside, infantry cheered hoarsely, voices raw from shouting. Boots pounded against the turret in celebration and relief. Someone laughed through tears, that particular sound of men who hadn't expected to survive the afternoon. For once, firepower hadn't abandoned them when everything else failed. And a mechanic's scrap-born idea, mocked 2 days earlier, had carried a battlefield through critical hours when German counterattacks sought to break American momentum. The numbers would appear in reports later, rounds fired, casualties prevented, ground gained. But in that moment, the crews simply breathed and felt metal cooling under their hands. Silence broke at 15:30 hours. German artillery shrieked overhead without warning. Earth convulsed. Mortars rained down in patterns that spoke of experienced forward observers calling coordinates. Lucky Lady 2 rocked like a ship in hell surf, suspension protesting. Dust cascaded from every seam into eyes and lungs. Rourke's voice cut sharp. Button up, eyes sharp on all sectors. Smoke. Screams from infantry caught in the open. The German counterattack hit like steel rain. Grenadiers pushing forward through gaps in American lines. Mortars bracketing armor positions with increasing accuracy. A Panzerfaust rocket streaked past, missing by feet. Concussion wave sucking breath from lungs. Eli slammed fresh belts into the coax, hands blistered from 4 hours of sustained fire, but still functional. The coax ripped again through the new guide, cutting through shapes in smoke. He didn't see bodies anymore, just threats, motion, muzzle flash. Training replaced mercy in combat mathematics. Infantry captain's voice burst through radio net, strain evident. Hold that crossroads, or we lose the entire flank. They held, metal and will against German desperation. Another Panzerfaust streak. The tank rocked violently, armor groaning under impact stress. Fear clawed at discipline, but discipline held harder. Eli lost count of bursts fired. Only rhythm mattered now. Fire. Feed. Survive. The belt guide kept working through heat and violence, that ugly scrap metal contraption performing beyond any reasonable expectation. A German machine gun team set up behind a barn's stone foundation, positioning for enfilade fire against American infantry. Rourke traversed turret. Eli tore the wall with sustained .30 caliber fire until ancient stone exploded and wood disintegrated. German soldiers dove for cover. Some found it. Some didn't move afterward. Minutes fractured into disconnected moments. Hours compressed into continuous present tense. Lucky Lady 2 fought like a cornered beast, wounded, exhausted, but unbroken. And in the turret's red-hot heart, a device made from ration tins and fender braces refused to quit when everything else, flesh, nerve, hope, begged for silence. Heat haze shimmered across the battlefield at 16:30 hours. Radios hissed static and fragments of desperate communication. O'Rourke swapped another barrel, fingers shaking and raw from handling superheated metal. Eli's shirt clung to his body, salt-stained and soaked. Rourke's voice had cracked twice in the past hour, but never broke entirely. A jam here and infantry died in the open. A jam here and Lucky Lady II became a stationary target for German anti-tank weapons. Everyone in the turret knew this mathematics with the certainty of survival instinct. That knowledge pressed like a physical hand on their throats, making breathing difficult. Eli fed the improvised chute, trusting Tom Harlan more than prayer, more than doctrine, more than any official specification. Every belt rattle was judgment. Every smooth feed was redemption from mechanical failure. They'd mocked the mechanic 2 days ago, called him dreamer, tinkerer, grease whisperer building fairy contraptions. Boyle had rolled his eyes, others had laughed. But in this boiling turret with steel fragments embedded in exterior paint and the world screaming violence outside thin armor plate, Tom Harlan's improvised work was gospel truth. Law written in bent tin, doctrine proven under fire. Eli whispered between bursts, words lost in weapon noise. Don't fail now. Please don't fail now. The chute, scorched black and battered by sustained use, did not fail. It fed ammunition with mechanical indifference to fear, performing the single function for which it had been created. Sometimes heroism isn't dramatic or cinematic. Sometimes it's a bent sheet of tin riveted by a tired man who refused to accept good enough when lives depended on perfect. Sometimes it's engineering that works when everything else fails. Sometimes it saves a platoon, a company, a critical objective. And nobody except the men in that turret would ever know the specific moment when improvised genius kept them breathing. Sun dipped toward the western horizon at 1800 hours. Shadows stretched like scars across churned fields. The German counterattack faltered as ammunition ran low and casualties mounted, then broke entirely, survivors retreating into gathering dusk. Rourke lifted his head from the periscope, breath shaking with exhaustion. "Cease fire. All stations cease fire." Silence rushed in, heavier than combat, pressing down with the weight of survived violence. Eli's arms trembled uncontrollably. His throat burned raw from breathing cordite fumes and shouting coordinates. He rested his forehead against warm metal, eyes stinging with smoke and fatigue that went deeper than physical exhaustion. Boyle looked at the improvised belt guide, his voice cracking with emotion. "Hell, we owe that grease monkey whiskey. A case of it." Outside, infantry slumped against hedgerows, helmets tilted back, shoulders sagging with relief too heavy to describe in any after-action report. Some cleaned weapons mechanically, others simply stared at nothing, processing survival. Lucky Lady 2's engine idled like a tired heartbeat, the Ford GAA running rough, but still functional. Somewhere oil dripped. Something mechanical clicked as metal contracted from combat heat. Eli finally exhaled fully, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He didn't cheer, didn't smile, didn't feel victorious. He just sat there in the turret's chemical haze, hands resting on hot steel, knowing with absolute certainty that survival often came down to small things. Screws, sheet metal, stubborn men with tools and time running out, who refused to accept that problems couldn't be solved. War was never won in sweeping strategies alone, no matter what maps and operational plans suggested. It was won in inches, bolts and lungs, burning with belief that one more improvement might save one more life. The belt guide sat scorched and battered, but intact, having fed approximately 3,000 rounds without malfunction during 8 hours of sustained combat operations. In the gathering dark, that number meant everything and nothing. everything to the infantry who'd advanced under covering fire, nothing to the logistics officers counting ammunition expenditure, but to 5 men in a Sherman tank, it meant tomorrow existed. Darkness fell slowly over the field bivouac at 2100 hours. Camp lanterns flickered to life, casting orange light across exhausted men and battered equipment. Mechanics swarmed damaged tanks like guardian spirits in grease-stained jackets, performing miracles with limited parts and unlimited determination. Tom Harlan walked toward Lucky Lady 2, every step dragging with accumulated exhaustion. The crew greeted him with tired grins and bruised pride written across dirt-streaked faces. Eli stepped forward from the turret, eyes too old for 20 years. "It ran 4 hours straight," he said quietly, voice hoarse. "Never jammed. Not once. 3,000 rounds minimum." Tom blinked hard against sudden emotion. He'd imagined it working during sleepless nights, believed in the engineering principles, but hearing confirmation shook him harder than incoming artillery. Boyle stepped forward, voice rough with sincerity replacing mockery. "Guess your scrapyard contraption just joined the United States Army, Corporal. No jokes now, just respect earned through combat testing. The only proof that mattered in forward areas." Tom removed the belt guide carefully, like lifting wounded steel that had earned honor. He'd reinforce it tonight, replicate the design for every tank he could reach before dawn. Tomorrow morning, war would demand more blood. He'd give them improved steel instead. Nearby, a medic murmured to a wounded infantryman, changing dressings under lamplight. Artillery echoed from distant sectors. War never fully slept in Normandy, just shifted positions and prepared for morning violence. Tom set the scorched chute on an ammunition crate, running his thumb along burn marks that told stories of sustained fire. Tools waited on his improvised workbench. Morning waited beyond exhausted sleep. Men had lived today because metal behaved correctly under stress, because someone had refused to accept that ammunition feed problems were simply battlefield reality, because improvised engineering had matched German weapons through American ingenuity. That mattered more than commendations or recognition. It mattered in the arithmetic of survival that ruled forward combat zones. He picked up his tools as other mechanics worked under lamplight across the bivouac, an army of maintenance personnel keeping armor functional against impossible odds. Somewhere in the darkness, hedgerows waited for tomorrow's violence. Tom Harlan bent metal and will into shape, preparing for it. A colonel strode through the battalion maintenance yard the following morning, July 2nd, mud-caking boots, folded map under arm. He paused at Tom's workbench, eyeing rows of hand-fabricated belt guides cooling in dawn mist, each one refined from the original combat-tested design. Reports indicate one tank delivered continuous coaxial fire for 4 hours during yesterday's action. Tom nodded, suddenly uncertain of his voice, hands still smudged with overnight metalwork. The Ordnance Department's Armor Board has been requesting sustained coax-fire solutions for bocage operations. Another nod. Breath held against hope and regulation. The colonel touched a completed chute gently, examining the craftsmanship. "Field expedients win wars when bureaucracy can't keep pace with combat requirements, Corporal." Tom finally spoke, voice steady. "Just wanted them shooting when it counted, sir." The colonel looked at him directly, really looked, seeing the exhaustion and determination. "Son, yesterday it counted. It will count again today." He walked on toward the command post. Orders barked across the yard. Engines rumbled awake. Tank commanders checking systems. Shermans rolled forward on tracks that sang steel promises, each one carrying ammunition belts that would feed through improvised guides made by tired hands. Eli leaned against Lucky Lady Two's hole nearby, helmet tucked under arm, watching preparations. Their eyes met across 20 yards of mud and morning light. No cheers, no banners, no ceremonies, just a soldier and the man who kept his mechanical world firing when it mattered most. Eli called softly across the distance. "See you on the line, Tom." Tom raised his wrench like a salute, a gesture of shared understanding between men who survived through mutual dependence. War didn't celebrate innovation with fanfare or medals. It survived by incorporating improvements that worked, spreading solutions through informal networks faster than official channels. A maintenance report filed 3 days later, real, dry Army language stripped of emotion, would read, "Coaxial MG feed improvements implemented by forward maintenance personnel demonstrated effectiveness in sustained high-rate fire situations. Recommend evaluation for theatre-wide adoption." And somewhere in the operational archives of 3rd Armoured Division that bled across France from Normandy to Germany, a sentence survived longer than gunsmoke and memory. Field modification increased crew survivability and weapons system reliability under combat conditions. Sometimes heroism wore greasy fatigues and worked by lamplight in mud. Sometimes victory arrived as a mechanic refusing to let a gun quit. Sometimes war was won by a scrap of tin, bent true by tired hands, that wouldn't surrender to the possible. The belt guides spread through 7 core maintenance sections within a week. By month's end, similar modifications appeared in other armoured divisions facing bocage warfare. No formal directive ordered their adoption. Combat effectiveness made them inevitable. Tom Harlan kept fabricating improved versions throughout July 1944, refining the design with each iteration, until the Sherman tanks of Normandy carried ammunition belts that fed without interruption through the green hell of hedgerow warfare. The guides weren't mentioned in tactical reports or strategic assessments. They appeared in maintenance logs and mechanic notebooks, spreading through the informal networks of men who understood that survival depended on countless small improvements aggregated across armies. In September, an Ordnance Department technical bulletin would formally address coaxial ammunition feed improvements for confined mount applications, incorporating lessons learned from field modifications. The official solution resembled Tom's improvised design with remarkable similarity. By then, Lucky Lady 2 had fought through Saint-Lô, survived the Falaise Gap, and pushed toward Paris with a coaxial machine gun that hadn't jammed since July 1st. Numbers appeared in ledgers, rounds fired, enemy positions suppressed, objectives secured, but the real victory lived in maintenance tents, where mechanics bent metal, in turrets where gunners trusted equipment, and in moments when sustained fire meant the difference between advancing and dying. The war moved forward, measured in miles and months. Small innovations moved with it, invisible to history but essential to survival.